My introduction to video games was by a neighborhood kid when I was 3 years old. The game, Double Dragon. I know it probably seems like nothing now, but imagine having never seen a video game before, then witnessing what is essentially an interactive cartoon. I went home, tiny mind blown, and so excited to tell my mother about this new thing I discovered. Now, I don't remember this exact moment, but I do have a vague recollection of watching someone play Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. I never found out exactly what my friend was running these on, but I do know it was a home computer of some sort. Based on the games and the graphics, I worked out that it was probably an Amiga 500, which were like stupid expensive back in the day. Most other kids at the time would be playing the NES, and compared to the graphical powerhouse that was the Amiga, I'll admit Nintendo's visuals were a little disappointing. Saying that, I never complained whenever I got the chance to play one, because they were still hella fun. A year or two later, my dad got a Mega Drive, and for me, this was a substantial upgrade of what a home console was capable of. Sonic, well, okay, look, at 5 years old, I sucked at Sonic, a game that requires a whole lot of fine motor skills, which I had yet to develop, but damn if it didn't look slick as hell. That superior processing power made the game run smooth as butter, and I was always quick to rub it in other kids' faces, how slow and lame Mario was compared to Sonic the Hedgehog. Looking back, I'm really glad the internet wasn't a thing yet, because there was something so lovely and wholesome about it all. Sonic saves the captured woodland critters and sends Dr. Robotnik packing, and with a shake of a fist, he's like, "Oh, I'll get you next time, Hedgehog." And in modern times, there's the possibility of kids stumbling across pictures of Sonic fucking Tails in the mouth. There's also a surprising amount of porn depicting Tails as a girl. I wonder what that's about. For the best part of a year, I was very much Team Sega, because let's be honest, the Mega Drive was just so far ahead of the NES. But I still remember the first time I saw it, the system that changed my life. I was standing in Virgin Megastore on Aston Quay, 6 years old, and I was glued in place witnessing something amazing. It was Super Mario World on the SNES. Some guy was playing one of the Ghost House levels, the one where you come across Big Boo for the first time. And I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I think it was the depth of color that had me absolutely mesmerized. Yeah, the SNES really was something different. Games in the Mega Drive looked great, but games in the Super Nintendo felt alive. Living, breathing worlds where your actions had weight. The sound chip was a cut above every other cartridge-based console. We no longer had beeps and boops for our sound, we had rich, fully realized compositions and effects. And the controller? I can't even begin to describe how good a SNES controller felt in my hands after the pointed, boxy experience of the NES and the somewhat dumpy feel of the Mega Drives. What can I say about Super Mario World that hasn't been said a million times before? That opening music just defines my early childhood. I cannot think of anything else that elicits such joy. The game is absolutely wonderful from the word go. The colors are so rich and vibrant and full. Look, no offense to the NES, but going from this to this felt like man having just discovered fire, eating shitty burnt animal carcass, to suddenly having a full carvery dinner. Everything had been improved. Mario's moveset, the complexity of the levels both visually and functionally, and you could now save your game. Oh, and we were introduced to Yoshi the dinosaur. That little dude rocked. Even though SNES games weren't as brutal in terms of difficulty, I still needed a cheat cartridge to get through this game. However, when I reached the 5th castle, I realized the Pro Action Replay's invincibility cheat wasn't going to protect me from the instant death of getting dunked in lava. And this level had a long stretch of nothing but a moving platform with a whole lot of opportunities to plunge to your fiery death. There was a moment when I realized that if I ever wanted to see the end of the game, I would have to actually practice, and holy hell, the sense of achievement when I finally did it after an hour of trying. I had never felt anything like that before. When we emulate games, they look sharp, every pixel expressed to its fullest, but back in the day, we assumed a lot of what was happening on screen, mostly due to the fact that we were using RF cables and crappy quality CRT televisions. The resulting visuals were less than optimal. There was this girl that lived downstairs from me who was a couple of years older, and sometimes we would play Super Nintendo together. And after one of the animations where Mario destroys a castle, he does something which was sort of hard to make out, but my neighbor, completely sure of herself, said, "Mario just pissed on the castle." And I believed her. It wasn't until many years later, well into my teens, that I actually questioned it and asked, why would they put that in a kid's game? I remember walking into my cousin's room and seeing Zelda for the first time. Back then, the vast majority of games were side-scrollers because they were just simpler to make. I had never seen a game done from a top-down perspective, and it was weird having to let your brain adjust to this whole new way of looking at something. A Link to the Past is what I guess we'd now call an action-adventure game, but back then we just called them RPGs. It wasn't until many years later that I started making a distinction between this type of game and, say, Final Fantasy. Unlike traditional RPGs, you didn't level up your character through defeating enemies, but by progressing through the game. Defeating bosses gave you an extra heart, and by exploring the world you could find heart pieces. I still prefer this method of progression as it gives you a reason to explore your environment and also feels more fair in terms of challenge. A Link to the Past was the first game I'd ever played to have a proper story with characters you cared about and a whole world to exist in. It wasn't about getting from point A to point B, but about all the fun you could have in between. No other game until Ocarina of Time was able to capture the same sense of adventure with a world that felt so robust. The only thing that sort of irked me in Link to the Past was the Dark World. After the third dungeon, you had to travel to this parallel dimension of Hyrule where Ganon had taken over, and this is where you had to complete the remaining 8 dungeons. Normal Hyrule looks so vibrant and beautiful and clean, and then suddenly you're thrown into this shitty-looking dead version of the same place, and it sort of reminds me of the Cursed Hill Valley in Back to the Future Part 2.
Ganon.
Everything in the Dark World makes you uncomfortable. You feel isolated as all of the inhabitants have been turned into monsters. So yeah, from a storytelling point of view, it achieves its desired effect. As a gaming experience, though, you go from your first few hours of, oh my god, this place is gorgeous, to, ugh. There is a genius to Super Metroid and how it tells its story. Being the third game in the series, we are given a cinematic opening to bring us up to speed with what's happened so far. Bounty hunter Samus Aran has almost entirely eradicated the Metroid, a deadly alien species deemed too powerful and dangerous to be allowed to exist. A single baby Metroid hatches at the end of the second game, and unable to bring herself to kill it, Samus hands it over to the Space Science Academy for research. Everything's cool for a while until space pirate Ridley murders everyone at the Academy, stealing the Metroid in the process. We see Samus chase Ridley to the planet Zebes, the setting of the original game. Now, from this point on until when the credits roll, all story beats are shown in-game. We are never given any more exposition, nor are we ever told what anything is. Our entire experience is given to us by what we see, and the game achieves this by creating such a varied and organic world. I hadn't played the first 2 games, so with the exception of what I was shown in Super Metroid's intro, I had no context for what any of this stuff was. As far as I understand, this section near the beginning is supposed to be from where you fight Mother Brain at the end of the first Metroid. But even without knowing that, the environment still tells you so much. It tells you that this place has been abandoned for a long time, that something awful happened here. Super Metroid absolutely excels with its environments. Each one creates this very rich and detailed world, from the creepy greens and unsettling pinks of Brinstar to the hellish landscape of Norfair, or the twisted backdrop of the wrecked ship. Oh, and the music. Each and every track in Super Metroid is an absolute quality composition, creating very distinct moods for each section. As a child, I was a bit disappointed that I was able to get through the whole game in just 2 weeks, but as an adult, I appreciate the tightly paced experience, providing a nice 8 to 10 hour sci-fi action romp with absolutely nothing wasted. This is still one of my favorite games of all time. Okay, this is the one game on the list that hasn't aged well. It still looks gorgeous with a phenomenal soundtrack, but honestly, the last time I played it, the gameplay did feel kind of ass. As an action RPG hybrid, you are made wait until your gauge reaches 100% before you can launch your next effective attack. As the game progresses, you get the ability to charge attacks, going up to 8 full attack bars, giving you the ability to launch a devastating melee. It was an interesting idea for a combat system, but one that unfortunately comes with way too much bullshit. Even though the game involves real-time combat, you still have some traditional RPG elements at play which are determined by your stats. For instance, the chance of being hit by an enemy is reduced the higher your agility is, and sometimes you'll automatically dodge an enemy's attack. Saying that though, I can't tell you how many times I would spend 15 seconds charging an attack to then be immediately countered by an enemy after I launched it. And the timing didn't seem to matter. Sometimes I'd go a bit earlier, sometimes a bit later, but those motherfuckers would always be there, ready and waiting to ruin my day. Needless to say, this gets real annoying real fast. When I was a kid, I didn't read. I mean, I could read, but I just had no interest. And remember, this was a time before decent books like Harry Potter or Skullduggery Pleasant existed. Secret of Mana was my first piece of media that involved so much reading, and at 8 years old, I thought this shit was amazing. From a grown-up's perspective, I can honestly say the story is still pretty good. The writing, though, is... well, it's bad. Not the worst I've ever seen, but yeah, it's pretty damn clunky. And then there was Secret of Evermore, the game we thought of as Mana's sequel, but was in fact a spin-off made by the American branch of Squaresoft. This was a whole lot more enjoyable to go back to because a lot of the bullshitty enemy AI was fixed. While I do prefer the vibrant colours of Mana, Secret of Evermore creates a really nice mood with some very detailed shading. There is heavy use of browns and greys in the colour palette, but they actually managed to make it look full of energy, not cruddy and lifeless like the way modern games do. I've come across quite a few people online that really dislike this game, but replaying it as an adult, I was very surprised by how much I preferred it to Mana. A charming Alice in Wonderland-esque story about a boy and his dog done in the Secret of Mana style. I mean, really, what's not to like? When I was a kid, it was difficult to get to watch video game footage. I had this one VHS tape called Game Breaker, which had a full hour's worth of clips, and this one game, Super Probotector, better known as Contra 3 to the rest of the world, looked metal as f***. About a year later, I had it in my possession, I'm guessing because I wouldn't stop talking about it, and despite the game's short length, I played it a lot. This is one of those games without a single wasted moment. Every teeny tiny part of it feels deliberate and well thought out, with some amazing set pieces and monstrous boss fights. While on the surface it looks like a simple run and gun, an immense amount of strategy goes into every single button press. I felt awfully chuffed that I was able to beat this game on both easy and normal difficulty as a child, but had quite a rude awakening as a grown-up. As I started emulating games, I found out the American version, Contra 3, is significantly more difficult than Super Probotector. You see, PAL games are capped at 50 frames per second, while NTSC games are 60 frames a second. This means that any American or Japanese games will play 20% faster than the ones I was used to from my childhood. And good grief, the game that I once thought was a breeze suddenly became a whole lot harder. I know you'll think that this is the age of Cyberpunk, but let me tell you, Cyberpunk belonged to the 90s. I remember Manga Video released a box set called the Cyberpunk Collection, which contained a 3-episode OVA of Genocyber, 80 Police, and Cyber City Oedo 808, all of which are proper good anime. So yeah, I really dug the genre and was absolutely obsessed with Shadowrun, a bizarre RPG shooter point-and-click hybrid, and I know on paper that sounds like the dumbest combination, but god damn, it worked so well in practice. You play as Jake Armitage, a courier that gets gunned down in the street as part of a contract hit, but moments before death you get revived by a mage called Kitsune. Before the healing spell can take effect, you are bagged and tagged and sent off to the morgue. And this is how the game starts. Your character rolling out of a mortuary unit, having no idea who he is. I mean, what a f***ing cool way to start a game. After scaring the bejesus out of the morticians, you are tasked with figuring out who you are and why an attempt was made in your life. You can talk to anyone you like, starting out with only a small number of available keywords, but saying the right thing to the right person provides you with new keywords. This is the meat of the game, giving it a real old-timey detective vibe right out of a film noir. I tell you, there is never a dull moment in Shadowrun. Pretending to be the Popo, to wiping out a local street gang, to getting a doctor to fix your head computer, but instead he accidentally triggers a dormant time bomb. In one section, you get invited to a private club where it's revealed that all the members are vampires. Your adversary, the CEO of the biggest, baddest corporation in town, turns out to be a fire-breathing dragon. Need I say more? All of this is presented from a very stylish isometric viewpoint, and while the total play area isn't massive, the world feels really substantial. If you've never played Shadowrun, it is absolutely worth your time. Over here in Europe, we got seriously dicked over during the SNES era, missing out on a whole load of iconic games. Both Final Fantasies, Super Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger. There was this SNES magazine I used to read called Superplay, and I almost wet myself the first time I read about Earthbound. A game with a Peanuts-style aesthetic set in a hyper-stylized small-town America with aliens and psychic children. Oh, hell yeah. And did we get it over in Europe? No, we did not. But you know what? None of that matters, because we got motherfucking Terranigma. Bitchiness aside, it was an absolute travesty that y'all never got this stateside. Releasing in 1996 at the end of the Super Nintendo's life, they were able to squeeze out every ounce of that beautiful grey box's power. Crisp visuals, a damn catchy soundtrack, and such a bold use of colour that it made me feel all tingly in my pants. That even felt weird to type. Terranigma is an action RPG following Ark, a wisecracking rapscallion sent from the underworld to revive Earth. In the beginning, the planet is full of decay and bad things, but slowly you revive the good stuff, plants, then animals, and finally human beings. With its excellent gameplay and rich story, I got through it pretty quickly, but it wasn't until many years later that I returned to the game and found a buttload of extra content. You're able to grow some of the towns by helping out the local, I don't know what to call them, genius, I guess? Some of them being based on real-life figures. Belle invents the telephone, Matisse creates breathtaking artwork, Mick invents the hamburger. Mick Hamburger! Oh, I just got that. This wealth of extra content almost creates a whole new game within the game, and it was one of the most unexpected and really lovely surprises I've ever experienced in my gaming career, especially seeing as it took so long for me to discover it. Terranigma is not without its faults, the main one being the same problem which all RPGs suffer from. There comes a point in the game where being underleveled makes one boss almost impossible to beat. However, if you spend a few extra hours grinding, the rest of the game becomes trivial. I guess it's about finding that sweet spot, a little bit over or underleveled depending on how much challenge you want. Being that as it may, the game is still incredible and just so full of charm that it is impossible for me not to recommend it. I know I missed a bunch of games, Kirby's Fun Pack, ActRaiser, the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, just to name a few, but this video has already run a lot longer than I'd meant it to. The Super Nintendo is far and away my favourite video game console of all time. Aside from all the stuff I gushed over, the colour palette, the sound chip, the comfiest of controllers, it got difficulty balancing perfect. The challenge of a lot of games from the NES era really felt cruel at times, and with a lot of these games you'd have to just accept you were never going to see the ending. SNES games, while keeping the challenge high, almost never felt unfair. But most of all, there is a wealth of absolute classics. I do not think any other console had so many amazing titles produced for it. These games have very much stood the test of time, and all I can say is that I feel so blessed to have been able to experience them when they were brand new.